Good evening, and on behalf of the India International Centre and Context in Westland, I am delighted to be here introducing a panel of speakers, which includes our beloved writer, Sandeep Raina. This is Sandeep's first book and his first novel, though he has been writing pieces otherwise, has been published in the media a lot. But I think a first novel is always special, and this one is just the most beautiful novel, the most tender, the most loving novel I think I've read in a long, long time. So I'm delighted that we could publish the book at Westland. And it's also the fact that I think that Kashmir has been in the news in so many ways, especially in the last few years, that this novel becomes even more special. It speaks to a moment, it also speaks to the forever of Kashmir. And to discuss all of this, to talk to us and talk to Sandeep about the book, are two very, very engaged people. I use the word engaged because I know that I could introduce them primarily as novelists, as short story writers, but I think why they are even more special, to my mind particularly, is that they both engage very seriously with all that's going on in the country and in the world around us. Omer Ahmed, Anita Nair, I'm delighted that you're here with us today. I could not think of two more appropriate people to respond to Sandeep's work and to talk to him. Omer, for once, the gentleman first, before the lady. Omer has written several novels. Jimmy the Terrorist is one that I still think of as my favorite, though it sort of contends very closely with Storyteller. Omer is an ex-JNUite who has studied international relations, who has worked with think tanks and organizations in different ways, some of it to do with Kashmir as well. Anita Nair, also novelist, short story writer, has done many kinds of writing, including writing essays, and has a film come off her novel that has been a national award winner. So she too wears several hats. The most recent one is of high-profile supporter and ambassador for UNHCR. So I know that she too has been thinking very closely about this idea of what is home and what does it mean to be a refugee in this world in our time as part of her UNHCR responsibilities. So here we are. I think the most appropriate thing to do, especially for readers who have not read this marvelous book, let me hold it up. It's called, sorry, off the screen, yeah, A Bit of Everything by Sandeep Raina. It's a novel. And yeah, one of us should take a shot of all of us holding the book. Maybe right at the end, Shweta will do this for us, my colleague. Sandeep, I know that this novel has come off your own life in many ways, but it's not just that. It's also a lot more. And it has come out of your experiences of living outside Kashmir, outside India. I read in your author bio, like everyone else who has read it, that you were in Istanbul when the idea of writing about immigration came to you and about migration. And then that the novel came alive in England is how you describe it. So how does it work then? You conceived this novel in one place, the novel was born in your mind and in your life in another place. You produced it in another place, now you're published in a different space and time. Tell us a little bit about the contextualizing of it, the framing of this narrative of yours, how you did it, where it all began, and where you think it's going as a book in the way it's been responded to also. Over to you.
Thank you, Karthika, for all the glowing remarks about the book. So thanks for that. And to your question about how did I get to the point to creating the novel? I think yes, I grew up in Kashmir and until the age of 22. Then I left. I lived in Delhi for 10 years, in Turkey for 3.5 years. When I moved out of India, out of Delhi, and lived in Istanbul with my family, I think there was perhaps a lot of more time available to me to reflect upon the events of the past, of the recent past, which was like just 10 years ago. We had left Kashmir, and I had kind of put um, deliberately stopped thinking about Kashmir because perhaps the events were not too easy to recollect, and therefore I was keen to perhaps give myself time and space, and Istanbul provided me that time and space. But then it's also a very lovely place with a lot of friendly people, and I was very relaxed. I think in that frame of mind, I think I started jotting down little stories about Kashmir, not really stories, but passages about my own experiences of the people who lived there, how we lived, and also you start missing, the language and the environment, and you want to recollect all that through these snippets, which I started putting down. And then when we came to England, which was a few years later, I think it gave me an environment where I could put and stitch all of this together into a little more coherent story, and want to tell other people about the life in Kashmir, the life we led, but of course through the characters, and started building the characters around the story. And then I think the story over a period of time, a long period of time, I would say, where I had to research a little bit into what was happening in Kashmir at that time, what must have happened in Kashmir after we left, that it became a bigger story and therefore took the shape of a novel. Uh, I think then in 2014, we decided to go to Kashmir and return at least for a short time to show our children what Kashmir was like, because they were growing up quickly and we didn't want them to miss out on that experience of Kashmir. That was a very transformative experience to go back after 24 years. And then a lot of things get revealed to you when you go after such a long time. One is that I had been reflecting about the things in Kashmir, the events and the people, but then to see it with your own eyes is a totally different experience. So all of that went into the book as well. The return, my personal return with my family, and the lovely experiences we had in seeing all those old places and meeting all those friends and neighbors and people that we hadn't really communicated with or talked to or seen for a very long time. That's what all went into the novel. Of course, not through the eyes of the characters, through the viewpoints of the characters.
Which then brings me to the idea of a return and the sense that, is there always a home somewhere else for all of us that we cherish inside us, but it's probably not the home we've built in our immediate space? And how do these homes then work in our heads? Like, how do we assign loyalty? How do we assign affection? How do we take away one from one to make the other? These are questions that you explore in the book, of course. I'd like to ask Anita, from her point of view, how this played into her response to the novel. Like, I noticed that you also commented earlier that this question of the idea of home was something that you took away from the book. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Ma'am, please unmute.
Say something, Will.
Yeah, hi. Sorry. Yeah, so one of the things that struck me most about about A Bit of Everything, is how it talks about uh, the idea of home. So there is this figurative home that the character Rahul is building, and he, spends so much of time devoting to the nurture of this home and the garden, and then of course when he goes away, I mean that's one part of the book that broke my heart, is how he brings all his 54 cactus plants into the living room and pours warm water into it. And that made me wonder about what is it that you take away when you leave, and what is it that you keep behind. Um, I mean, as somebody who loves plants, and the character in it also loves his plants. I was heartbroken when he had to do that. He had to pour this hot water into his cacti, and destroy them once and for all. There's absolutely no way of them flourishing again or even resurging again. And so I that kind of made me want to ask you when we were going to have this discussion about why do you think the character did that? Because it wasn't as if he poured hot water over the flowering peach tree or any of the other plants or destroyed anything in his house. So was that a symbolic act, or was that something that in some way you as the author was speaking to the character?
Yeah, I think that the different situation in which you leave your home, we all have left home in one form or the other. We leave our parents' homes, and we do leave so. Sometimes we leave albums behind, we leave photographs behind, we leave audio cassettes behind, and then we keep on going back to those and wanting to take them, but not really taking them back with us. When you leave home in the physical home, in a different situation than willingly, has a very different effect on you that I perhaps in my case or for many other people who have left home forcibly or under difficult situations, they tend to remember home far more deeply. I can't say whether it happens to those who willingly leave home, but definitely very, very deeply. And you feel you must kind of touch and feel and recreate them in your own mind, perhaps every single day in one way or the other. The colors and the objects and the environment that you leave or you have left behind or were you forced to leave behind, it becomes imprinted in your mind forever, I think. And it's very hard to uh, get rid of them if at all one wanted to. But it just gives you solace. It gives you comfort, and it's something that you want to relive your memories through. So all those impressions and all those things. So if you're asking me what to take and what to leave behind, I think if you can't take everything with you from your home, you can definitely remember everything from your home. And why not? I think we should all remember everything that we grew up with, the plants and the trees and the mountains around you and the walls of the house, what we did to those walls and the books that we read. They should all become part of who we are, I think, for the rest of our lives. And these are beautiful memories. And I don't know whether that answers your question, Anita, or not.
No. I mean, it really was mostly a reflection on asking you, um, I mean, the pertinence of that particular gesture, because it kind of has been in my mind ever since I read the book. And I
Okay,
think,
practice.
why did he have to do that?
Okay,
So
so
was that a
okay.
symbolic,
Let me explain that a little bit. So what used to happen in Kashmir in the winter was that if you left your flower pots out, so since you're a gardener yourself, so you would understand this. So if you left your flower pots outside, the geraniums and the cacti or any flowering plant, any potted plant, they would die because of the cold. And you had to bring them inside your rooms, and you had to then pour warm water in them. It's not to kill them, but because there was frost around on on the soil around the plant, and you had to melt the frost first, and that's why the hot or the warm water used to be poured to melt the frost, even when it was inside the house. Remember, this is late 80s, we're talking about, and there was no central heating in Kashmir. And the rooms used to be really cold. So the outside temperature, if it was -10, it would be also inside the house. So if you had your plants inside the house, you had to then pour hot water, and then you had to take care of them. So this character is really taking care of the plants and hoping that they would live and survive even when he has left. That's what the situation is.
Okay. So sitting here in southern India, if you like put a bit of warm water onto your
Yes.
plant, it will survive. So yes, of course, it's a completely different take.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I get that. Now, because it's the thing, of course, this is beautiful paragraph where you I think describe talk about where Rahul yearns for everything about Kashmir, and he says he wants this and he wants that and he wants to eat sticky Kashmiri rice and all of that, and that entire paragraph is a pain to missing home, and that's something that I think that when you talk to people who have lost their home. Um, that's a recurring thought that comes up again and again of all those tastes and smells and sounds and sensations. All of that wraps up to them the meaning of home. And I think in many ways, apart from all the political undercurrents and how it comes into play and all of that, I think for me one of the greatest takeaway from this novel is how beautifully you've captured the life of people on Tashkent street, and the different kinds of people, and how beautifully Kashmir comes alive, and it makes you think and also yearn to probably go visit a Kashmir that used to be like that once.
I'm so glad that you say that it can prompt people to visit Kashmir. I hope they do. And they realize the beauty of Kashmir at so many different levels. It's not just about the physical beauty of the place, the mountains or the rivers and the lakes. There's far more beyond that. There's history, then there's culture, there's the songs and the dances of Kashmir. And there is the people of Kashmir, the lovely people, and they like everywhere else, as human as everywhere else, and they'll shower love on you, and they'll share their food and their homes with you with a lot of love. So yes, thank you for saying that, Anita. I really appreciate what you said about that you enjoy those sounds and flavors and texture of Kashmir that comes from those words. But it happens to everybody, I guess, who leaves their home and moves to another place where you miss those things suddenly. When we moved to Delhi, I missed them to a certain extent, but they were still available. From the sites and the people you met, you were still in connection. When we moved to Turkey, it suddenly got lost completely. This was a very different environment, and you start missing them even more. You missed India, and you missed Kashmir, and you missed so many things. Food wasn't available, so you start missing all those things. And then, and England is a little different here. It's more cosmopolitan, and you do tend to still get different flavors on. But I think because of the distance, it just becomes, this feeling gets stronger by the day. You miss those flavors, and you miss those sounds, you miss that language, and you want to be connected to all those words and all those beautiful things. Yeah.
Talked about Tashkent Street, Anita. You mentioned how that has really come alive. And I want to ask Omer not so much about the writing or the coming aliveness of it, but Tashkent Street and Varmull and the names that are that resonate as well through this book. What is our connection with place and name? Everywhere all around us, people are busy changing names to try and pretend that history is being changed. In every name, there is obviously a sense of history and a certain moment. And in undoing that, we try and undo a lot of things that perhaps should not be. And Omer, you've been going to Kashmir. I've followed your social media engagements on this sometimes. I know that you have a relationship with the land as well, in a way that perhaps Anita and I don't at all, in the same way we're just visitors. What does someone like you make of Sandeep's book? What is your response to his idea of memory and longing? Because it is, in many ways, if I may say this, Sandeep, it kept me at the level of human emotions far more than the political anxieties and the political rage that one sees obviously everywhere. And I wondered if Omer had a response to that. Did you think this novel was playing too safe?
Too many questions. As it is, I mean, I can't say about a relationship to a land. beyond the fact that I've also been a visitor, an interested visitor. I don't think anybody can replicate the sense of mitti in the same sense as the people who have lived and consumed it. For example, Anita's little misunderstanding about the warm water. So, story from the early 90s of somebody I know who was a very young girl at that time, a Kashmiri girl, and a soldier who was from South India had asked her for some water. Now, this is 90s, lots of tension with the forces, but you can't refuse a request for water. So she got him water, but she got him warm water, right? Because, somehow had to show her, disapproval. But this is the winter of Kashmir, and the soldier took the warm water and blessed her for giving her warm water. And they are, however well you're traveled in a region or a place, you don't understand its layers. You don't understand its dynamics. I think in that sense, Sandeep's book for me was very interesting in the sense that even till the last pages, you're unraveling all those little details that the main character himself had not seen. And so your journey in the book in that sense is like a stone falling into a pond. Slowly and slowly you see more and more of what you had not seen earlier. I think that's I don't know if people will think he's played it safe. I think he's actually done something which is very brave in these times when we talk about Kashmir. Instead of taking, just a black and white, a political dynamic here to call and not to call, what I thought was incredibly brave of this particular novel is how Sandeep has tried to untie small and large knots. Whether it's the massacre in Jammu in the 40s, or it is the attack in Varmull in 47, or it is the later atrocities that we have all read of. And I think that in doing so, in not taking a simple position, the character in a sense seems timid. He doesn't immediately jump to a conclusion, but by the end of it you see that as his greatest strength, because he's able to grow and able to learn not just about the Kashmir issue, because I don't think there is a simple thing as a Kashmir issue, but about himself, about Tashkent Street. And I think that is incredibly brave. I don't think that is in any way a safe position to take.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'd really like, Sandeep has this lovely passage of the main character in a train with the Bosnian man talking about being a
Yes.
refugee. Would you read that for us, Sandeep? Maybe it'll give
And may I
us
just interrupt for a second there to say that those who are listening to this conversation while Sandeep is reading and while other people are speaking, please feel free to add your comments, your questions. We'll take the questions by and by. So, sorry, over to you, Sandeep.
Okay, thanks, Omer, for your comments about the book. I really appreciate those. Okay, so this is the passage you mentioned, Omer. "I, refugee in Germany," said the man. A refugee who had lost his home was building homes for other people in another country. "You like Germany?" asked Rahul. He felt like a probing journalist. He had never talked like this before, digging to know more, trying to see his own future in the Bosnians' refugee nest, asking if new countries were good or bad, if refugees liked them or not. "No," the man said and paused. But in Bosnia, son go army, son die. Sons, army, deaths. They had filled the newspapers and televisions in Delhi in 1990. Rahul had chucked the papers aside and switched off the TV. He had not wanted to know of the deaths in Kashmir. A lake outside broke into ripples as a train went past. He imagined serene shikaras gliding and bobbing on it, buttercups and poppies swaying by the shore, a Rasul Mir song playing, Shamima Dev singing. Should Rahul too talk about Kashmir? Tell the Bosnian how he fared going back? That he too could die there? He looked across the aisle. He knew no one here, and no one knew him. Who could he talk to? When he had walked down Tashkent Street in Varmull, people had greeted him all the time. Adab Ars, Professor Rahul. Namaskar, Rahulju. How are you, Mara? Salam, Professor Serb. Here, no one knew his name. No one would ask him how he was. If he spoke about Varmull, would they understand? Chaman, his cousin, had been right about the comfort in talking to your own people, those who would understand you. At least Amar, his one Kashmiri Pandit relative in Salzburg, would.
Omer, what particularly about this made you choose it for us to talk about and to listen to?
About that particular passage, I think in that sense, this is something that,
Yeah, I'm interested to know why you
well,
found that the one.
I mean, I think this is also something that Anita can talk about. But there's something that we often don't understand about people who are forced to leave, right? There are people who choose to leave,
Mm,
and then there are people who are forced
mm,
to leave. These are two different categories of people. And when you're
mm,
forced to leave, sometimes you do not look back because you're too afraid, too scared, too hurt. The horrors are right
mm,
behind your neck. Uh,
mm,
but the minute you settle is when there's a lot of things that come back, right? And then they come
mm,
back in the sense of a sense of taste, a sense of touch. I know, uh, I know friends in Delhi, Kashmiri Pandit, Kashmiri Muslim, and who you know who hate Delhi, right? But they don't hate Delhi in the sense that they don't dislike Delhi so much. It's because they have a longing for a mountain landscape that they know. They long for the climates, for the seasons that are familiar to them. And they long to be also in a place where, as Rahul speaks about in that passage, where Rahul wants, sorry, as the main character Rahul, not not Sandeep, as that character speaks about in that passage, where somebody will know them and understand who they are. And this is something that we don't understand. We often mistake the difference between an immigrant and a refugee. That even the immigrant's loneliness is to try to, sense, in a sense, make a better life. The refugee's decision is also that, but it's also combined with the pain that you don't have a choice. And that's a complex thing, and not
mm,
easily. That distinction is sometimes too easily, written over, and everybody says, "Okay, we can find place for Syrian refugees in Europe." That's
mm.
not that's not really the answer to all of that. I mean, I'd
Yeah,
like to hear what Anita thinks about this,
yeah,
given her position with
yeah.
UNHCR.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that again struck me about the character was that he doesn't speak Kashmiri, I mean, doesn't speak the language all the time that he's in England until he meets Mo. And then he tries to start a conversation with his tea seller. And I was, back of my mind, I was wondering, why would he do that? And then it hit me that as a refugee, not an immigrant, as a refugee who can't go back. One of the things that you do is you first silence the language in your head, because that is how you think, and those are where your thoughts originate from, etc. So I think, like you said, Omer, and I'd like to really know what Sandeep's thoughts on these are, is that this novel makes you think. I mean, it really very clearly tells you who is an immigrant and who is a refugee. It makes that distinction very obvious, in the sense that the most obvious one, of course, is that the immigrant has the option to go back, the refugee doesn't. And even if they went back, they would never be going back to the land the way they left it. And they have to reintroduce themselves to the way the land has turned, or the way the land has changed from the time they left it. So Sandeep, as the novelist and as someone who's had to leave Kashmir, tell me about the impact or the importance of the language, because I see that there's so much of Kashmiri words that is being used in the language, in the book, and there's been absolutely no effort to educate. I wouldn't say the word educate, but to kind of spoon feed the reader what the meaning of those words are. You're left to figure it out. And if you're still not clear about it, I think there's always the option of going onto a search engine and finding out. But to you, as the author, what does the language mean to you?
I think as a novelist or somebody who's writing a story about a place and the people of a place, language is everything. Because the language conveys their thoughts, it conveys the nuances, it conveys their feelings. But because we're trying to do something else here, we're trying to write something in a different language from the native. So we're writing a novel in English because it's global, it's more universal, it's better understood by many people, and you do want that story to reach many people. So, but it's still very important to highlight the texture and the detail of a language, because the language conveys culture so much. It conveys the feelings sometimes in ways which the other language cannot. So I think the native language has an important role to play when you are telling the story of a place. Of course, the human feelings are common and they can be conveyed through the English language, but the native language will tell you about the flavors, the scents, and the things that you mentioned earlier about also certain cultural nuances which just can't be conveyed in other languages. So you have to sometimes insert those words in and perhaps explain them through the text, but also expect the reader to maybe stop at that point and think about what could this peculiar foreign word mean? What could this, it sounds interesting, so maybe I should, as you said, Google. These days, everybody can Google for words and they can find out. But it's important to leave them in because they lend that element of difference from what you know. And I think that's a very important aspect of telling the story.
Yeah. Anita, you work with multiple languages as well and multiple formats of multiple languages. So I imagine you grapple with a lot of this, but we see so much more evidence of the way the language flows between text and spoken, and between, like, as editors, we struggle with this a lot with translated text, with things that are coming into English from elsewhere. And there were times when I read your work and I thought to myself that because it does that same thing, it positions words in certain ways with some slight explanations, not necessarily detailed. You are working in a space of translation almost. it's true that in any category we would say this is an original work in English. Is that how you see it? Or is this a complex translation actually?
Are you asking me or Sandeep?
No, I'm asking Sandeep actually to comment on what you picked up on, to talk about how he connects with it.
Sorry, I think I missed the question completely, Kartika, but is it about...
No, I was saying that what all of us work with, like Anita, for instance, has translated from Malayalam to English. So when you look at a translated text, you know that it has come from elsewhere. But there are times when one reads your work where it also feels like it's come from elsewhere because of the languages involved, because of cultural distances between the language in which you're writing and the original thoughts perhaps that came to you in another language maybe. So I'm wondering if this idea of original and translation within the context of this novel and others like that being produced now, is it time to rethink these categories and to talk about translation in a different way and an original in a different way? This is a general question, a general thought that anyone could step in and address perhaps.
Okay, let me try to address it. I don't know how much just
Okay.
question. I haven't thought about this before, but I think I haven't read a lot of translated work, so I wouldn't be able to tell you if that is any different from what I would have read as original English writing. But there will be always a lot of things which will get lost, as typically they say in the cliche word, lost in translation. And how do you deal with that? How do you ever replace the originality of a language with another language? It's a hard one. So if you're talking about my novel and the use of Kashmiri in that, I think I didn't realize that it would come across as having those passages coming from somewhere else. I thought they were naturally a part of this narrator's or the protagonist's thoughts. It's just that sometimes he has outbursts and he has emotional outbursts, and where he's expressing himself better through the use of those words or connecting with those words, or because they kind of relate to him, those feelings or those, the place that he comes from, and he wants to remember them in that particular way. If a Kashmiri meets a Kashmiri in England, the first thing they'll start off is by speaking in Kashmiri. So and then they will of course move to Hindi or Urdu or English, so on. But that's the first and the deepest connection point, I think, for individuals. So for writing, I think if it really has to bring out the best, or the originality, I think it's best in its original language. I don't know whether translations always do justice to that or not.
Right. Omer, you want to go into this? It's something I'd really like to know more about and think more about.
I don't know whether one can talk about it so much as one can demonstrate it. And again, there's this passage of Sandeep of Sandeep's book where he writes about Chilai Kalan. These are the deep, harsh days of winter, and maybe in reading that bit, we can all see it. Would you want to read that?
Would you, Sandeep?
And for Anita's knowledge, Chilai Kalan was a time when those flower pots required hot water, because temperature would dip down to minus 10 degrees Celsius, outside and inside the house. So Chilai Kalan starts in December every year, I think on 21st of December. So that's the period which I'm describing in this passage here. Okay. The Chilai Kalan, the deadliest 40 days of winter, invaded Kashmir like Genghis Khan every December. This was followed by the less lethal Chilai Kurd in January and the retreating Chilai Bacha in February. Genghis Khan had never attacked Kashmir, but his horrors were known to all. Unlike him, his descendants built the lovely Mughal gardens in Srinagar with gushing fountains that spilled poetry and curved stone alcoves that bred love. The Chilai invaders attacked Kashmir, swishing their icy swords from December till February, sending Kashmiris reeling into their homes and putting poetry and love on hold until the winter thawed. Icicles hung like knives from the roofs, and the cold wind butchered hands, ears, and noses. Puddles froze, mud hardened, and wood dampened. Although Ragni's fingers, bloated with chilblains and itched, she said to Rahul one day that she loved the Chile Kalan because it kept the relatives out, who came in swarms in the summers, like the forces' convoys, claiming that the Wooler and Dull lakes turned their homes into hot hammams, while Varmull's cool wind made it a summer paradise.
That's beautiful. Omer, I know you wanted to earlier ask of Sandeep what his influences were and his readings were as he came to the novel or before he came to the novel. And this description, this writing reminded me that perhaps this is a good time to talk about that. Where do the words come from? Have they been inside you for a long time? Are there others you've read who pull them out of you? That beautiful episode, incident you told us about that happened in Istanbul, where you saw in action people coming together from different communities. Was that something that inspired it? Do you think you could talk a little bit about all of that?
Yeah, sure. Okay, words are there with you. I mean, if you know a language which you learn in your childhood, it's not going to go away, and you would want to use it. When you're expressing through a novel the place, and so Chile Kalan, Chile Kurd. I might have forgotten some of these things because living in Delhi or in other countries, you do not remember many things. But when you are sitting and reflecting and wanting to recollect, a lot of these things do come back. And what comes back mostly, as I experience, is joyful, happy memories. Childhood is always kind of the happy time in our lives. But in reality, when we are children, we don't think of childhood like that. We know that there's school books and there's school teachers and scoldings from parents, But when we recollect childhood, we do not remember all that. We tend to remember the nicer, happier, because somehow that gives us more comfort. And that's true for every memory you associate with a place that you've left, whatever situation you might have left it in. So my memories came back with a lot of positive, happy feelings. The event that you mentioned, Karthika, yes, it was a very influential moment, I would say, and I'll quickly try to narrate that here. What happened was we were on a trip to Greece, and on the way to Greece in this coach, which was full of Turkish Muslim people who had come from Cappadocia. And we were my family was the only foreigners in that coach. And we were on this journey from Istanbul to Greece. And we stopped in this town called Komotini, which was not necessarily on the tourist map. And here, these Turkish Muslims, they left the bus and went into a cafe, and we went along with them, not knowing what was going to happen here. And then it was prearranged that some Turkish Christians who had been living in Komotini, in this town, for the last 75 years, after they had fled Cappadocia in the 1920s, had come to meet them. Now, they had grown very old. They were really, really old people, and coming to meet younger people from Cappadocia, same town. It was a town called Kayseri in Cappadocia region. So imagine now you have these Turkish Muslims come from Turkey, and you have these Turkish Christians who are now living in Greece come and meet each other, and they're exchanging stories about how they left, what's left behind, the people that they knew, the neighbors, and the things that they shared when they used to all live there. And they all knew each other's uncles and aunts and parents and so on. It was a very beautiful moment to observe. And then they broke into songs, and they sang Turkish songs. It was a beautiful reunion of the Turkish Muslims and the Turkish Christians after 75 years. You can very well imagine those families only knew the connections in the past, and they didn't really know each other. But the way they met and hugged each other, and they cried, and believe me, we cried because you observe something so so beautiful. It brings tears to your eyes. I think that reunion was a very important part of my story ultimately, and that's what that comes across perhaps in the story as well. Not that I connected that in any way with Kashmir at that moment while we were witnessing it, but later on when I was writing, I thought it's very important to do that. But added to that was also the fact that we did go ourselves to Kashmir after 24 years. My parents and my wife and our children, 3 children, we all went after many, many years. And that was one of the best reunions, I can say, which I had with my old friends, who I hadn't seen for 24 years, or the neighbors who were still there. And how can I even try and explain that feeling? You've grown up in a place with all these homes around you, and they're still there. They've grown older, and they're crying. These reunions are very, very special, and they cried, and we cried, and we hugged each other, and they just wanted us to stay back for longer, and we couldn't. So all of those play a very important role in when you want to talk about reconciliation, building bridges, meeting people from times when they have been disconnected, even if they have become different and you have become different, you talk differently and you eat differently, it's still important to have these reunions. And I think that Turkish reunion taught me a big thing, as did my own Kashmiri reunion.
Right. Just a quick, I thought one of the really interesting, and I mean, something I hadn't thought of earlier, but came very strongly through, was your description of the way children might be described as they were Hindu kids, they were Muslim kids, they were Sikh kids, they were the forces kids. And I thought to myself, I'd never thought of a category like that for childhood. And when you're talking back about that, do you think about that still as something that has continues to be the way children are talked about and the way they might remember their own experiences? Is that something you saw when you went
I,
back to?
I think so. I mean, when we were growing up in this town called Baramulla, which was a border town, because just about 50 kilometers from there, or a little more than that, was the border of Uri. And so there was very heavy, this is peace times, right? We're not talking about that Kashmir was in any form, there was no militancy at the time. This was 70s and 80s when we were growing up. There was a lot of people from army who used to be deployed, officers and soldiers. You had barracks practically everywhere. It wasn't the same as it is now in terms of there were no soldiers on the streets, but there was a lot of army personnel, and the children used to come and be in the same school as we, and we used to always call them army kids. They were army children. They were different, and they were smarter than us, I think. And we weren't exposed to so many different things, because those kids had moved around the country and they could speak English better. And so definitely there was a distinction, not because their parents were in the army and it was the forces. It was definitely more because there was culturally there were different children than the children of Kashmir. So we did see ourselves as different from the army kids, and I think. But the only thing was, when you're in school, we went to a Christian school. It didn't matter. It didn't matter whether the children or the teachers were from the army, or we were Hindus or Sikhs or Christians who went to the school. We were just children, and our neighborhood was, composed of people from all different faiths. And we never thought that this was any different, especially for the Pandits and the Muslims and the Sikhs and the Christians. They were all Kashmiri in that sense. And when these children from army or the forces were with us, they were also the same. I mean, you would not necessarily think about, oh well, this person's different. Yes, they spoke differently than you, but then childhood and human nature is such that you gel very quickly, and you all become the same. And that's how I think it used to be, and how I think the world should be. I mean, we should all be not breaking them into these categories. They are distinct. I mean, a Pandit is different than a Muslim in so many ways. The food we eat and the language we speak, and the faith we have. But that doesn't mean that you have to necessarily emphasize on the difference. I think you have to emphasize on what's common between us. there are so many things that are exactly the same. I would say 98% things are same and 2% is what is different. But what happens is somehow politicians and the environment or organizations or right-wing organizations may want to emphasize on differences, the 2% difference rather than on the 98% what is common, which is humanity, I think, which is common between all of us.
Yeah. I know it's deeply sad when you think back and you kind of listen to someone talking about a time when all this was actually possible. It seems so finished at this point. Omer, you want to step in and extend this thought, what Sandeep is talking
Well, I
about?
think Anita also wanted to say something, but I'll just say
Yeah.
something very shortly,
Mm.
which is that I remember a Kashmiri friend, well, from Ladakh, but we can talk about Kashmir in the larger landscape as you bring in also Mirpur and every other thing into that. But said a very smart thing, which I keep repeating, which is that differences don't have to be divisions, right? The differences will exist. They are natural, and there are multiple multi-ethnic communities from which Kashmir draws its nature. But those differences don't have to be divisions. They can be celebrated with each other. And I'm going to say one last thing before I hand it off to Anita, which is that I remember the tagline for Khalid Hosseini's film, The Kite Runner, was that it's possible to be good again, or something along those lines. I think Sandeep's book does something which is deeper and far more important. And unfortunately, I don't want to give away much of the end or anything of that sort, but I think what it does is open up the possibility of it is possible for people to forgive both themselves as well as others. And I don't mean that this solves anything, because the grand injustices remain. The house remains burnt, so many deaths remain. But it's not the grand things that people within communities like Tashkent Street can do much about. But what they can do is rediscover who they are and who each other is. And that is a much deeper and a much more complicated journey than simply to be good. So, in that sense, I find that this type of journey that the character that Rahul takes in this book from the beginning to the end, to me, moved me far, far more than the Kite Runner. Move that on to Anita.
Yeah, so Sandeep, I really wanted you to talk a little about Kashmiriyat because it's a phrase we hear, but it's not ever really talked about. And to somebody who's not from Kashmir, what does Kashmiriyat mean?
To tell you honestly, I had never heard this word when I was growing up in Kashmir. I had never heard this word, and on this, I'm being very honest. I heard it only after I came to Delhi or in years following that. You're growing up in a place, as I said before, you with Pandit kids and Muslim kids. Essentially, it's predominantly Muslim. So a lot of Muslim kids were my friends, and there were Sikhs in Baramulla, especially a lot of Sikhs, and then Christians as well, who thought about what Kashmiriyat means. We were just playing together, and we just had friends. We chose friends not because they were Pandits or Muslims or Christians. We chose friends because we liked them. We liked those people, and we liked those boys or girls, and we played with them. And then we grew up with them and we studied with them, and they're still my friends. I mean, we still have friends across communities. Who cares whether they're Muslim or whether they do a namaz at home or they go to Gurudwara or they do a church? I don't care, and I think a lot of people do not care about these things. So maybe the term was coined for political reasons, and that's where I think these things become sometimes ridiculous. Why do you even have to do these things? Why can't you just promote that social cohesiveness, the love that we should have for each other as human beings, focus on what's common between us, the common threads, than the differences. And therefore, you would never have to coin terms, and you would never have to create labels about, okay, this is about Kashmir, this is about non-Kashmiri. But I think what works, I think, to answer to the question is what works really to bring communities together who have some differences is just purely and purely, I'll repeat, love between the communities, understanding of each other, empathizing with the problems that we all have with each other. I give this example very often. It's just like a family unit, you know, we are all different. Myself, my wife, our three children, we are all different, you know, we are different human beings and we have different desires and likes and dislikes. We clash sometimes and we agree sometimes and sometimes we agree to disagree. So why can that not be applicable to the street that you live in, to the town that you live in, to the country that you live in? There will always be disagreements. We have them, we see them every single day in our own home. We are 5 adults in the house now, and we have disagreements, and we tolerate sometimes, we accept sometimes, we understand sometimes, we empathize as well. So I think I would take that example and say, expand that family example and make it into that, whatever you want to call it, Kashmiriyat or Indianness, or, you know, the globalization, whatever term you may want to create. But say love and understanding.
Sandeep, we are sort of running out of time, I think, quickly. So I'm going to ask you to address a couple of questions that we've got here. One is Omkar from Bangalore. He says, my question to Sandeep is, while conceptualizing this novel, does he in any way subtly miss his birthplace, its vibrant culture, its people, and more than the present turmoil, vis-a-vis the same something about Istanbul and other cities he has lived so far? I think the question is, do you still miss Kashmir? And what is it like when you think about Kashmir vis-a-vis, say, Istanbul and other places you've lived in?
I miss Kashmir, I miss Delhi, I miss Istanbul, and I miss all those places I've lived in. All these experiences which make me who I am, you know. I think when I say miss, it doesn't mean I'm pining for them, but yes, I would love to remember them with a fondness, you know, with love and make sure that they become, I learn from all of those experiences. I miss them to the point that I would love to retain what I've learned from those places, including my growing up in Kashmir for 22 years. So yes, every city that we live in, every town that we live in, your native country, town, or foreign countries, they all form you, they form layers within you. So I would say we should remember all of them, whether miss or not, but we should remember all of these places.
There's an extension to that question, which is, I mean, in some ways from Pallavi in Delhi. Sandeep, what are the 3 things that you would like to share about living in Kashmir and the life there? I think in some ways you have obviously already spoken about this, but if you want to do a 1, 2, 3, we are welcome. You're welcome to.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Rogan Josh. The snow on Gulmarg, and I think the love of the people, which is still continuing. I would say, you know, it comes through at so many levels, despite the distance. So I would say, okay, those are the 3 things.
Okay. There is a question for Anita as well, which I'm going to ask you, perhaps all of you, to come in with the last couple of minutes, perhaps, because we have we have only a very few minutes left. Anita, the question is from Ratna in Delhi. You have written various styles of, books. What is your most favorite one? I presume you're being asked to pick
So
your
the
own
novel.
favorite writing style.
The novel.
The novel. Okay.
Yeah.
Which then allows me to ask that one question I really do want to ask of all of you, which is, how much does writing matter? How much does writing fiction, and especially about subjects like this, say Kashmir, say autobiographies, say our lives revisited, does literature, does novel writing contribute to a sense of healing? This is a question that Janani, who was supposed to moderate the session, really wanted you to talk about. So I'd really appreciate it if all of you would take this. And perhaps we could end with Sandeep to give him the last word. Anita, you want to start?
I guess, you know, for me, because I can't speak for the others or for any novelist otherwise, is that when I write, it's basically that I'm grappling with something that I can't understand. And when I write, it becomes that much more lucid and clearer in my own head. So many of the questions that I probably, wake up in the middle of the night worrying about is answered when I write about it. And so for me, I would assume that these are questions that probably plague several readers as well. And what I'm offering is a perspective. It's not the only perspective, but there are multiple perspectives. And this is my perspective on how to deal with whatever it is, whether it's loss, forgiveness, redemption, whatever it be. So that is what, for me, writing represents. And I know that I have found several perspectives in several novels when I've read other people's writing. I've found a new way of looking at things, a new way of understanding things. And I guess as a writer, that's all I can aspire towards.
Well said. Yeah. Omer,
Um,
literature, healing.
So look, I mean, authors are not very powerful political forces. Let's put that out in the thing. We are There are much more bigger fish in the pond. But at the end of the day, I keep coming back to this line by Milan Kundera, which is that the struggle of man against power is a struggle of memory against forgetting. And its own way for me writing, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, is to make sure that some stories are not forgotten.
Sandeep.
That's all I can do.
Kapil, I'll just ask you that question. Did you say writing is help with healing?
I suppose I'm asking, does writing, especially fiction, does it have a larger role to play when, as Omer says, perhaps you're not politically powerful in the same way as the politicians are or the people who make policies are? But does literature do something? Can it change the world in some ways? Do you see yourself writing also to change and perhaps to heal?
I think literature has every story that we tell or retell is extremely important to change this world, to change the society that we live in, because it highlights the problems. It highlights the difficulties that we have as human beings, and those are changing, with every generation, with every year. And unless somebody mentions them somewhere in writing, as Anita said, when you read a book, you learn something new through it. You learn about a perspective, another angle, and that starts bringing about a change. It's the change here starts first, and then you start changing. The discourse becomes different. The discussions take a different flavor, and why not? That's how change starts. It starts with a small step, and I think literature is that very, very important step. A book is a very important way to bring about the change. And I think it's a much deeper and a long-lasting change than the policies made at the top by the politicians, because they don't last for very long.
Right. I don't know. Reading your book makes me feel optimistic about the world, though you write about deeply sad things and deeply hurtful things. But at the end of the day, you feel okay, if time has destroyed, time can heal. If people can move away, they can perhaps come back as well. And there is that pleasure and redemption, that old word that we all look for. It's all there in the book. And I mean, you know that I, of course, read the manuscript when it first came in, and I've been with it for a while. But today, just before this conversation, I picked it up as this finished book, which is a good time to remind everyone. Can we just hold up the book? So maybe Shweta can take a photo for us to enjoy later. But when I was reading this today, and I thought to myself, this is a book about Kashmir, yes, but if it was written about, I don't know, Bangalore, Kerala, Gorakhpur, Delhi, it would have had a different life, because it would have possibly been read for the characters and for the situation and for other things. The moment you write about Kashmir, it becomes about the setting, it becomes about the place, and it overwhelms everything else. So, in parting, I just want to say thank you to everybody with the hope that we will write, and of course write a lot more about home and all the things that matter closer to us. But Sandeep, I do hope you will get an opportunity to write about other worlds and to claim other identities, none of which you could have done so in this novel. And I hope we will get to work with you and publish you, because I do think that yours is a really powerful voice and you worked really hard in this novel to make it what it is and to make us respond in the way we have. Um, you want to say something, and Sandeep, Anita, Omer, last words, then we can end.
Thank you, everybody. I'm very privileged, Karthika, that you agreed to publish the book. First of all, that you like the book and you still liking it, and I can see that. And thank you so much, Anita and Omer. I mean, it's a massive privilege for me to have you established writers and people talk about the book, read about it, and have me on this forum. I couldn't have been happier. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anita, Omer?
Well, thank you for a lovely book. So, and I'm really glad we had this discussion. That's all I can say. And please believe me, the whole thing about established is nothing. It's a beautiful book is a beautiful book. It doesn't matter if it's the first book or a second or a third.
So, Anita, you can say the very last words.
Sandeep, and I hope your writing journey is wonderful ahead as well, and that you write about other identities, as Karthika was saying. And thank you again for this beautiful book. For me, it was like stepping into Kashmir. And that is probably one of the best things that any writer can aspire towards, to be able to transport the reader into the place that you're writing about.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, India International Center, for allowing this conversation to come together. Bye.
Bye-bye.